thanks for inviting everyone to pitch in later on. I know a lot of people rather want technical questions to the talk specifically, but in this case, we actually want to hear from you. So if you could leave a comment actually instead of a question about how you experience your life during the talk when something pops into your head, and then we can maybe address it later on. It would be super interesting to hear. Okay, so I changed the title slightly, as you can see, from Africa in general to South Africa. I don't want to be pretentious and say, okay, I've traveled Africa a lot, but my opinions are informed by the discussions I had with people throughout the continent. But let's keep it specific to South Africa since we are in a local GDG here. Furthermore, let me introduce Hold the Pain Harold. I'm sure you guys know Hold the Pain Harold. It very much describes our life, I think, here. Just staying positive, and powering through all the issues we have here locally. And still we can be fans of GCP, I think, at the end of the day. So firstly, putting forward, these are my opinions. It has nothing to do with my professional life. They are informed in the discussion we had with the GDG community, which I'm a proud member of, but also in my work catering to the local market, to the South African market, and the stark differences I see to the work of my colleagues overseas, and also how the markets in general operate overseas, and the differences I see to South Africa. And yeah, so as a part of the local chapter, the GDG chapter, I welcome everybody from all sorts of backgrounds. Luckily, in Africa, we have a diverse community, and that is reflected in our GDG community here locally. And I'm very proud of that fact, led by the Code of Conduct introduced by Ahmed there. We have built something awesome here, and I'm very happy to be part of this. And I'm very proud to speak in front of you and in front of esteemed speakers like Tawanda. So firstly, next to the social background, we also have a very diverse technological background, meaning we have people from the web development, we have front-end, back-end developers. I would say, and you can later on correct me, but we are mostly mobile developers here, and some of our community members didn't have contact with GCP at all. So this is partly introductory, and I hope still there's some good insights for people that are very experienced with GCP, who I already see here some in the attendee list here. Firstly, the promise of cloud is somewhat of a democratization of technology. And I think that holds very much true. So basically the company, the multinational company, is using the same infrastructure that a local South African company is using. And even you as an individual, whether you are a learner, whether you are a veteran, you're using the same technology. The only difference between you and others might be a monetary one. And I think this is an important topic to point out, because the whole pricing is catered toward a rather international audience. Of course, some local considerations are taken into account, but the biggest difference that is to be observed is the difference in monetary power. So this is an important topic that I will address first. And I'm not only talking about you as individuals or us as individuals in the community, but I mean also if you speak to a local South African company, the motivations, how they see value is often, just very different to what we see from overseas. And if it comes to leapfrogging, meaning overcoming issues that others had in the past and going straight to the destinations where everybody are, meaning you competing with multinationals from Africa, then I still believe you can do that, but you have to be careful about how you go about it. So this is basically addressing that part of the equation. Firstly, if you are new to GCP and haven't seen this before and visit any kind of resource not signed in with your account, you will be confronted with this option to start a new account, start a new project with $300 credits. So you might think, okay, that's fairly normal, but what's in it for me really? $300 is quite a bit, and you will probably be able to use it up within 90 days. So this offer is like limited to 90 days. It's not like hidden anywhere. You will see it later on. I just pointed out here because it's not in my screenshot. So the first thing I would say is, yes, please kick the tires, check out what is possible, but make sure, since it is timely limited, that you scope out a time frame, maybe during your time off at the end of the year or something like that, where you actually have time to invest some time into investigating either the platform as such because you don't know it, or specific products you always wanted to see. Because as soon as these $300 are gone, you will see, and from my own experience, I can tell you, you will wonder if you want to spend like $50 on this specific experiment, because $50 you can still do a lot otherwise for. So this is a time for experimentation. You should scope out time within this initial phase of your exploration to actually see what is going on there. And this is just a very, very important point I want to put forward, that you should try and gather especially experience with how the billing works. So not only like from a technology perspective, see what is under the hood and do some actual dev work, but also during that phase, you will have a true picture of what you are actually consuming and what you would theoretically paying for up until you actually use up these $300. Because when it comes to the traditional way of thinking, when it comes to infrastructure, and this is like a fictitious example here, but in your mind, you might be used to, or it might be convenient to think of your spend as a monthly subscription. And still, I mean, even in a cloud native world, we often prefer this kind of view where we have a monthly spend. Let's say we're deploying a workload on 2 machines, and these 2 machines are $25 each, and we have a monthly bill of $50. No unexpected costs. In the cloud world, though, if we're thinking about scalable workloads and maybe scaling it down to 0, but also it probably spiking, it might rather look like the second diagram I've set up here. And for Hold the Pain Harold, it's a bit of a think here, because yes, he knows that he doesn't have any spend in March, but he did see at the beginning, or maybe now in August, that his bill will spike. And this is like a eerie kind of feeling that he has to combat if he wants to like use the cloud as it is intended to be used. So very catered toward that $300 of credits that you get initially. As you can see, the $50 monthly spend is double the amount what you would use with a dynamic payload. So you really have to change your mindset, get used to the pricing model, know which tech costs how much, and also read the fine print and delve into this rather uncertain world, you do have mechanisms like capping your spend, that is there. But the point I'm trying to get across here is, during that exploration phase, figure out how much things cost. Next to the credits, there's this option of a free tier, meaning you pay a certain baseline. For a certain baseline, you don't pay anything. But as you can see, it applies to basically every product. This list goes on for a very long while, meaning you can actually, after you have spent your credits, you can then explore the platform and its products with a certain amount of tolerance, free tolerance. Here I'm showing you Cloud Vision because I'm pertaining to that later again. It is a certain amount. Now, in this case, for the first 1,000 units are free. And up until then, even after your credits are spent, you can use this and explore further. Now, coming to the fine print, you have to be careful. For instance, you saw that you get a free machine for a whole month. In this case, it's only for the US. In my case, for instance, I prefer to have my workloads in Europe. And then when it comes to me thinking about where I actually want to run my scripts and so on, this wouldn't be so attractive to me because I want, a workload maybe in Europe. So be careful of the fine print at that point. But do make a sport out of it. And I'd like this old talk here from 2018 from Colt McAnlis, where he actually describes how it looks like if you want to run your projects on a shoestring budget. And at the end of the month, I compare my projects and check my bills. And in some cases, for some experimental workloads, I do try to get the best bang out of my buck by comparing monthly to monthly my project costs and getting it as low as possible, meaning I'm trying to use the free tier as much as possible, and you should maybe too. So in terms of reducing your bill even more, you have like a project set up. This is like a fictitious project over here. We have some compute and you have like a database. The easiest way to reduce this cost to basically nothing is to delete it entirely. So the benefit in GCP, you can set up projects and then you can delete them and then you won't be billed for them. And this is the easiest way to go about reducing costs or avoiding any kind of mishaps or large bills. So in which way you actually do it. So you delete it, then you create a new project if you need it, let's say for a dev environment or for a staging environment, and then you delete it again, and then you create it again. And it would be best if this were in somehow possible to either automate it or at least have some kind of machine readable file that would describe your environment that you want to deploy, and would then magically create a project as needed when you need it so that you can destroy it again. Whether this is automated or not, this is not so much the issue here, because I think if you're really anxious about your costs, you would rather want to see it manually deleted than by script and then wondering about the outcome. So automation is not the key point here, rather that you have some kind of defined set that you can manipulate in the way you want it and then create your whole environment, possibly far more complex than it is shown here, and just get your environment out of it. And of course, there's a principle of for this. This is called infrastructure as code, and you've probably heard it from your DevOps colleagues and friends. As I said, we know that there are mostly mobile developers here and web devs, but everybody, I think, has heard at this point about infrastructure as code. And there's a lot of opinions flying around which tooling you can use and how you can go about this. But the very common way these days is Terraform. And what I would suggest is you do is actually have a look into Terraform. There are other ways of going about infrastructure as code. So I don't want to make it too much of a political discussion here, but it is useful, and making the case there is it's not only applicable to GCP. So Terraform can be used with all its modules on a multitude of environments, including the other hyperscalers. So all the invest you do here is not lost. So yeah, would advise you to look into that. Coming to how to organize projects, though, just creating projects out of nothing might not be sufficient. So you would have stuff like underlying files, possible machine images that you want to use on a regular basis, from which your new projects would then be driven. In this case, what I would suggest is you actually isolate them on a project level as well. As I said, if you delete a project, you won't be billed afterwards. But it also has other benefits as well. There's a separation of users more strictly. Although you could do that in a singular project, it is just the easiest way to have separate projects. Now, I have to say, if you have separate projects and are looking to interact between projects, you might need to delve into how access management works a little bit more than if it were in one project. But it is, I think, for our purposes here, the simplest way to interact, instead of on the right-hand side here, as you can see, having everything in one project, then deleting the ephemeral stuff and then wondering, did I really delete everything? And that's always an issue that will be nagging, and you'll probably see some kind of remnant being held up somewhere, and you're not quite sure, was that belonging to my system or not? Can I delete it or not? Rather have them separate is my suggestion. And another point towards that is that you will not only have this one project you want to like recreate and delete and recreate and delete, but you will have stuff that is somewhere in between, and you would have some special condition where you would have a project for a specific customer, or maybe even you're working as a team with devs, and then you would have like a production environment and staging environment. I would just say this is the easiest way to go. Coming to scale to zero, meaning you can actually design workloads to use nothing at all and only be triggered once they are actually used, event-based. A lot of you might know the distinction here. And in the GCP world, when we're talking about scale to zero as a term, it usually pertains to compute, meaning dependent on how you configure Cloud Run is basically running containers on demand. You could, for instance, to have a better reaction time, have a certain amount of instances running all the time. But I mean, you could start from zero. The same is true for App Engine. And again, there's a lot of distinctions to make. This is true for App Engine standard, but not for App Engine flexible. And Cloud Functions, I'm sure you've heard about Cloud Functions, where you would actually run a function as code directly from the cloud. Again, it depends on what you're actually trying to do, what your underlying requirements are. What I'm trying to say here is, don't think about the workload alone. So if you want to scale to zero and are using one of the paradigms that do actually scale to zero, think about the backend that you are using. What is happening there? If you're running a relational database, SQL, in the backend, that is super expensive because you have like a multi-node setup and need the high availability, then you're not quite scaled to zero, in my opinion. And this is where these pay-as-you-go products that also have this free tier part come into play. So instead of, like, let's take Vision API again, instead of doing your own inference on your workload and paying for all the CPU cycles, maybe you should use one of the pre-trained machine learning APIs and try and figure out if you really needed to do it yourself on your own workload. Speaking of, we just saw Firestore, Firebase. A lot of our community members want to host static sites, and you should have a look into Firebase, where you could get 10 gigs for free per month with SSL for your custom domains, and I think like about 350 megabytes per day in transfer costs. Speeding up a little bit, speaking of static files, although we don't have a local data center here, we are using the whole Google network to manage our workloads, meaning if we can make use of CDN locations, including the ones here in South Africa, you should try and do that. Everything in terms of Firebase now that we just saw is hosted locally. You can use CDN as a product itself. Coming to actual tips here is that if you are using Firebase, the static content will be cached automatically. You can, for instance, set up your caching locally with your Firebase JSON. Firebase nerds will know this, to, for instance, hinder that the request goes back to the data center and is served directly from the CDN. And this system is very public on peering.google.com, where you can actually see the edge nodes that, for instance, YouTube is using to cache their content. Have a look there. In trying to find the nearest data center, and sorry for me speeding up, but I wasted a lot of time in the first part there, is trying to find a data center that is nearby for you yourself. So I would suggest you go to gcping.com, where basically it will spit out the latency. There are fancier applications that show you bandwidth and protocols used and so on, which can be useful in certain use cases. But I mean, sitting down in Africa, South Africa, it is the most important thing for me, at least, is the latency when I'm setting up a workload and trying to find a data center nearby. And this is also maybe useful for you catering to other people. So you sitting in South Africa and are catering to your users maybe in South America, in Asia, or Europe, US, or wherever, you direct them to go to this page to find a data center nearby to them. And that might be difficult for you, like remotely deciding what is best for them. I want to point out, when it comes to developing and managing Google Cloud Platform, portability is very important. And I have spoken to many people since I've also spoke to Sylvia about this talk here, and my experiences were confirmed. So a lot of the time, people in Africa, including myself, don't have beefed up machines that they can prepare and hone to host their IDE. And this is where browser-based systems, for instance, the Cloud Shell, come in handy, where you can just swap out the machine. And in fact, in preparation for this talk, I needed to swap out the machine very easily. And now you see here the Google Docs presentation, where I just used the new workstation for my presentation. And the same is true for your IDE, including your shell. You can see here I'm using Cloud Shell within GCP console. I have Tmux set up for personalized. These are 5 gigabytes persistent storage that are spin up when you visit the Cloud Shell, including all the folders. You can make it ephemeral to spin up a little bit quicker. The benefit here is, firstly, you use a browser, but things are made easy for you. For instance, if you're trying to use an API from the shell, it will pop up you with an authorization. One tip, though, if you have decided for a specific region, you will be always prompted for these regions. Just follow Harold's advice here and set up your region once, your preferred region, and always use that region. That will also reduce the cost in terms of regional costs, network costs, and just stick to that region. That is the best way to go. The shell itself can be extended by an actual IDE. I would call it Visual Studio from the the console. It basically works like Visual Studio, including, as you can see here, I have a small Hello World Flask application that I've just in the below terminal, as you're used to from your workstation, spun up, which will then act as if I actually am using localhost. As you can see from the URL, it's some convoluted URL there, but it actually works like your local environment. And I'm not saying for everybody this is useful, especially for those who need Android Studio and so on, but if you are prone to changing your workstation a lot and having maybe a little bit of an underpowered workstation, this might come in handy for you. And also Harold noticed, hey, this works like my workstation. So coming to connectivity problems, not only latency itself, but we all know how unstable connections can be from Africa, from South Africa specifically. Speaking of load shedding here and cable theft, if you are reliant on having to move files around and move a lot of things around from your workstation to the cloud, then you might want to change that paradigm around where you would use the Cloud Shell basically as your endpoint, and not only move files between Cloud Shell and your projects, but also use it basically as a jump host to the outside world, meaning the people you're catering to, and also outside resources. And just to make it clear, although you might have made your project bound to a certain zone, that Cloud Shell can be running in a different zone. You can make sure where it actually is if you want to actually move like a petabyte file around with this command over here. How to go further? I would suggest, of course, try to get your experience by using your own projects. But in case of, for instance, larger Kubernetes environments where you would have like a large cluster, you wouldn't want to pay for it. So use Quick Labs. And if you don't have credits there, keep your eyes open on the blog, on the learning portals for credits. And then for the more elaborate kind of experimentation, don't use your own project, but rather try and find a Quick Lab. And there I'm just showing the catalog over here. Go actually into the description of the Quick Lab. Now these are quests, meaning they consist of multiple labs over here, but go into the description itself to just get a gist of what is happening there before you actually book it, because sometimes they are very benign and you might want something advanced. So over time that I actually promised to go, so I want to thank you. And Ahmed, if we could just maybe, I don't know if there's time there or not, see if anybody has a question firstly, or has some comment here to leave. I'll leave it up to you.
All right. Very, very nice, Reuben. Thank you. Thank you so much. I actually learned quite a bit. We do not have any Q&A questions, but we do have some experiential stuff from our community. So the first one is from Hendrik Skalakamp. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. He says, I've developed some data pipelines for local companies and had great success. To be honest, there wasn't much, if any, impact on us. We typically use Europe West 1 and use data store, GCF and Firebase hosting, Dataflow and BigQuery as our main building blocks.
Cool. Thanks for the feedback. So Europe West 1 is the way to go. So Europe West 1 is Belgium, to be exact, and that's also one of the first and cheapest zones in GCP. Thanks, Hendrik, for the feedback over there.
Awesome. And then from Simba Freddy Chawatama, so he says, I use GCP to host a blog I mostly forget about until I get the monthly billing notification.
Exactly. So don't wait for that monthly bill. Engineer your bill according to your requirements. So thanks, Simba, for that.
And then the last one is from Sylvia Dickman. So she says, I use GCP, often through Firebase, for most of my personal projects. Most of my work is experimental in nature, so usually the free tier is sufficient. The only bottleneck I run into continuously is the low limit on projects in Firebase. Every tutorial starts with a fresh Firebase project eating into my project quota, around 10, I think.
Yeah, good feedback there. Yeah, so good to hear that the free tier is sufficient there. And Sylvia, yeah, thank you for that feedback.